Welcome, everyone. I'm Mariquita Solis, the live stream host of all-creatures.org. All-creatures.org was founded in 1988 by Pastor Frank Hoffman and his first wife, Mary, and launched as the pioneer website in the United States for faith-based animal rights veganism. Today, led by our executive director, Tams Nicholson, we exist for all people seeking current animal rights vegan resources and offer decades of free animal rights and vegan content, including a huge repository of vegan sermons and Bible commentaries, animal rights strategies, free vegan authored books, recipes, upcoming events around the world, and the works of various vegan authors, poets, and artists. We also host current sites for almost 20 vegan and animal rights organizations, including Stop Crush, Unparalleled Suffering, and the Committee to Abolish Sports Hunting. We also maintain nearly 25 archival sites from animal rights, vegan activism of past decades. The bottom line is that we work to unite compassionate and empathetic vegans across the globe, from the past and present, who honor the dignity of each and every creature so that all beings thrive on a flourishing planet Earth. So, thank you for joining us, and make sure that you give StreamYard permission to use your name. I'm so excited to welcome American writer, feminist, and animal rights advocate Carol J. Adams. Carol is the author of several books, including The Sexual Politics of Meat and The Pornography of Meat. And I have one of her books right here with me. Um, and it is Living Among Meat Eaters, the Vegetarian Survival Handbook. So I am excited to welcome you, Carol. Thank you so much for coming. I've always been a big fan of yours and your activism, and you're speaking up for women's rights, for female rights. So I know that Tams Nicholson, our executive director, was very excited that you're going to be on here also. So welcome.
Thank you so much, and thanks for hosting these chats and for all that you are doing.
Well, I'm happy to host them. That's for sure. um, so, Carol, I just wanted to start off with a little bit of your background. Um, Tell me about when did you become vegan?
I became vegan as a result of writing The Sexual Politics of Meat. First, I was vegetarian. I became vegetarian 50 years ago this year in 1974. And I first tried to be vegan in 76 as I worked on the very first um, draft of what eventually became The Sexual Politics of Meat. I found it very hard back in 76. I should also say that back then, even though the word vegan had been coined at the beginning of World War II, the word vegan was not well known. Even in the year 2000, when I wanted to call one of my books with a vegan name in it, my publisher, who was a vegan, wanted me to use the word vegetarian. But anyway, in the 70s, if we were identifying ourselves as what we now think of as vegan in terms of consumption, we called ourselves complete vegetarians as opposed to ovo-lacto vegetarians or ovo-vegetarians or lacto. So in 76, I tried to be a complete vegetarian, not using any animal foods at all. And it didn't work. I failed. I guess I just put in a footnote here when I meet people today who said, well, I tried to be vegan and it didn't work. What I want to say to them is, well, maybe you tried the wrong way. Maybe there's a different way to try it. It's not that it failed, it's that approach failed. Anyway, as I worked on sexual politics, of what the book that became The Sexual Politics of Meat in the 80s, I came upon this concept, a 19th century concept that associated with Ellen G. White, one of the founders of Seventh-day Adventism. And she talked about animalized protein, protein in a sense that vegetable protein, plant protein that goes through an animal and becomes meat as we think of it. And I had been researching what happens to female animals in animal agriculture. And I thought, well, there should be a term for the foods that come from the exploitation of female reproduction. And I decided I had to, create it. There wasn't a word that worked for me. And so I coined the term feminized protein, just like animalized protein. But feminized protein was something that plant food, vegetable food that goes through a female animal and then is extracted as eggs or mammalian milk. And once I came up with that concept and thought about it, I got on the path of becoming a vegan and have now been a vegan for more than 30 years.
Well, that's amazing. And I love that story. Everyone's story is different, and you never know. I mean, a lot of people say they went vegan overnight, and some people struggled. I personally went back and forth, vegetarian, vegan, vegetarian. So it's always wonderful to hear the different stories. And when you did go vegan, Carol, did you have friends, supportive family or friends, or what did they say to you?
I think I had the unusual, perhaps a unique experience of being a vegan and traveling to campuses where there were students or professors who organized to bring me. And throughout the early 1990s, as I incorporated more and more vegan recipes into my life, I met all these young vegans, and they'd tell me about this vegan book or this vegan recipe. And had I tried squash for my vegan macaroni and cheese, just buy frozen butternut squash. And many of them were cooking off of tofu cookery. And one of the books that came from the farm, from a book publishing company. So wherever I went, I met vegans. I just was so fortunate. So there's one young student who gave me this Reuben recipe for making Reubens with tempeh. Incredible recipe. I still use it. And in fact, one of my son's friends, they came and they're not vegan, but they still say it's the best Reuben they've ever had was this Reuben. And so I wish I need to find all these recipes and sort of put them together. I have them in notes, or people would sign a little thing on their French toast. And like the young woman who did the French toast recipe, I was in New York, Farm Sanctuary had sponsored something to which I was invited, and then they had a reception for the speakers and the organizers. And so they had done French toast as one of the meals. And afterwards, I went up to find the young woman who had cooked it all. And I said, I just loved your French toast. And she said, oh, you're Carol Adams. So I just loved your book. So I've got this hand-inscribed French toast recipe. So veganism was nurtured by my travels throughout the country, by young vegans who become vegans because of my book. So it was this sort of circular, wonderful, supportive environment. And I'd come back and experiment. I'd get all these vegan books. My kids were young, and a new vegan cookbook after we'd read books at night, would look at the cookbook and decide what recipes sound good, what should we try, and I'd mark them. And then the next day, my 5-year-old and my 9-year-old would work with me on a recipe they had picked.
I love that story. And I love that you had support right off the bat. I mean, by going out there and meeting people, and they needed you. So that's wonderful. How does the peace of not eating creatures manifest in your life today, Carol?
It's so much a part of my life. I don't know that I can just say, oh, well, it's this segment right here. I think I'll back up and say how it first manifested during a decade when I was providing care to my parents, my aging parents. Between 2000 and 2010, I traveled north to help care for my parents. My mother had Alzheimer's. And my sisters always left me vegan food. I had a neighbor who cooked vegan food for me. I traveled with, I'd had nutritional yeast. And I write about this in a book, Never Too Late to Go Vegan. We did a chapter on veganism and caregiving. But during sort of the very demanding years of caring for, especially my mom, as Alzheimer's changed a part of her. And caregiving can be very depleting, no matter how important and wonderful it is and how committed you are to it. You're tired, and you want to find a piece of yourself that isn't just someone who's exhausted from caregiving. And the piece of myself that I found every day was my vegan self. That no matter what was changing and the hard things I faced as a caregiver, there was my vegan food to comfort me and feed me, nurture me, and remind me of where I was in the world, someone who cared, and that caring had brought about my veganism, but also was something that really was being lived as a caregiver. So during those 10 years, I'll tell you, my veganism was just this wonderful affirmation of self, where I was, who I was, and how I was related to the world. And after that, I mean, it's just who I am. I have probably 350 vegan cookbooks. I've got notebooks that I've organized, seitan, tempeh, favorites, aquafaba. And on days that I feel like cooking, I have all these wonderful resources. What do I want to try? It's so much a part of my life and my worldview that I don't know that I can separate it out and say it's A or B or C.
Yes, it is everything about you, and that's beautiful. I love that. Y'all, please subscribe and let us know where you're joining from also. And we're going to have questions. If you have questions for Carol at the end of this, please put them in the chat. When reading your books and watching videos throughout the years, Carol, and also studying feminine empowerment, I can really relate to everything. I mean, this sexualization of animals and women, and this denigration, it is highly disturbing, highly disturbing. And the oppression of women and the oppression of animals, it goes hand in hand here. And how is it that people are not able to see that it's linked? And do you get, when you talk to people and women and show them the connection, how do they respond to that?
Well, I don't think there's any one response. I think we could say that for many who are feminists, the struggle to recognize that women have human rights is itself its own struggle. And so some feminists might say, well, what are you doing bringing animals in? We've got enough on our plate. Look at what's happening to women around the world. The retrograde, reactive, patriarchal sort of fantasies that are being lived out. Look at us in the United States right now. So for some feminists, liberal feminists, they would say there's a button. Feminism is the radical notion that women are human. And yes, I understand that. But if we have a problematic conception of what's human to begin with, the human is over and above animals, and that human was defined for centuries as being white and male and middle class, that the rights owner of revolutionary times, of the Enlightenment times, the rights owner was assumed to be a property owning white man. So, what is the definition of human that we're aspiring to? And so, for a feminist like me who wants to widen the discussion within the feminist movement to say part of our oppression comes from likening us to other animals. Part of our oppression is because the notion of human already has a hierarchy to it. And we're constantly pushed to the bottom of that. We're not the only ones. Other disempowered people are. Look at how immigrants were talked about during the presidential election by the Republicans as animals, as animal-like. That as long as we have this conception of human as being over animals, we are in trouble if all we're trying to do is saying women are human or immigrants are human. Yes, that is a basic fact, but what does it mean if being non-human allows you to be exploited? And so suddenly we're in a complicated area, and oppression is a complicated thing. So it can be experienced that if people see oppression towards a certain group, they might not want to also have that combined with something else. And I should just put a footnote here that sometimes vegans, I've noticed this, I don't know if it's happening now as much as at the end of the 2010s, but vegans would go to feminists and say, you should be intersectional. Vegans, don't you know about dairy cows? And it was often, white male vegans doing this. And it was like, hey, can't you leave the feminists to us? We feminists are having this conversation. Why don't you go have the conversation with other white males who are still believing in the notion that meat and virility go together? So within the vegan movement, it was like some people got empowered to go after feminists as though that conversation wasn't happening, but not empowered to just bring down the whole gender binary and challenge it and stop being the experts for women. So I just got to note that, I'm sure, I hope that if you were one of those vegans, if you're, watching today, that you rethink that approach. So that is as much a problem as reaching women and other people concerned about human oppression. The other problem is helping vegans sort of decenter a notion of that our job is simply to go educate other groups about veganism, rather than that our job is to be allies with others who are struggling in an oppressive system. And being an ally is very different. It carries a different responsibility. It's a different presentation. We don't go in and just say, well, all these meals should be vegan. We have to start somewhere else as allies. So I'm
Wow.
sure around that. I'm sorry, but I had to circle.
I love it. No, because I've been taking a class at pachamama.org. And so one of the classes, it's not all vegans, but I've really woken up to segregation and to racism and that, this hidden, this world we're living in, the unconsciousness of it. And one of the things, so I'm taking Game Changer Initiative, and one of the things they're talking about is how to create a movement and working with allies, like you just said. We have to go in and work with it. How can we help you, and not go in and preach veganism, but help the other oppressed, or and come together and work together is so important. And I don't see that happening in the vegan movement. So many people are just very focused on changing people, and it changing into such a strict um, a strict, rigid way. I mean, all or nothing. And until we can let go of that, I feel like we're just not going to get the momentum that we need. I mean, when we are talking about oppressed people, we really have to ask them instead of, I mean, I know as a female, I know that I have friends that are male that don't have any idea of really what it's like for me to walk down the street at night. Um, alone. I mean, and to have that, or what it's like to be a female in society. So asking the questions of what is it like to be you? What can I do to help? Instead of assuming is so important. And I really resonate with everything you're saying.
Well, thank you. I guess the thing is, so for instance, how do we be vegan advocates? How do we, what's the positive way of moving forward? I see Chili on Wheels is here. Well, there's an example. Chili on Wheels. What a radical, wonderful presence. And I think for me, I've always done what I kind of think of as vegan propaganda meals. I don't call them that. But in Living Among Meat Eaters, and there is a new edition out. It came out last year. I'll try to show what it looks like. But that I like to believe that people can incubate insights. We end up in arguments with meat eaters. We end up defending our diet. And I think that helps a meat eater, a non-vegan, put a picket fence around their consciousness. Well, I might be unhappy, but look at how unhappy Carol is. All she's doing is arguing. And so I then fulfill some conceptual notion that vegans are unhappy, plus I don't have a hamburger in front of me. So the non-vegan can think, well, I might be unhappy, but at least I can eat hamburgers. So I feel like we need to sort of upend that notion that we should be arguing in the first place. And I like to do meals, and I don't even say they're vegan. Just have people over and let them walk away and think, oh my God, Carol's a vegan. That must have been a completely vegan meal. And let them incubate that. We think it's a sort of patriarchal notion. And there's a French writer, Derrida, who called it carno. My God, I'm going to forget how. Logocentrism, logocentrism. But the idea that the word prevails, that if we find just the right arguments, people will become vegan. And no, people see us as incorrigible and bores because we don't talk about anything else. And the reason we don't is not because we brought it up. Other people might bring it up at a dinner. I'm not blaming vegans. I'm just saying there's a more effective way, which is to bring people to us. And I just think we should be doing, without calling them vegan propaganda meals, wherever we can. Just mythologizing what veganism is. And we demythologize it just by serving this wonderful food. And it's sort of liberating to realize that we can do it that way. We don't have to accept these notions that if we're not arguing for animals at a dinner, we're not being successful. It's very interesting. When Living Among Meat Eaters first came out, I was at a conference in Boulder, Colorado, and some very strong advocates for animals were there. A vice president of PETA, a vice president of HSUS, and they both felt it was very important to interrupt me at the end and say, I always argue for animals. I always argue for animals. I don't let a dinner go by. And afterwards, all the women came up to me and said, we agree with you. We don't want to be arguing. Of course, there's always the sexism in conversations anyway. But fast forward 20 years, and both of these men now are trying to work for alternative proteins. They're saying, oh no, activism didn't work. We're going to do alternative proteins. Well, look, Maybe it was your concept of activism that didn't work. Maybe a more feminist, inclusive, inviting vegan activism would have worked, but you had ruled that out because you were in a more dominant position and you influenced the movement to go one way. But we could be going a different way. We could be inclusive in how we approach the issues and inclusive in how we do our meals.
Yes, exactly. I just was with a friend of mine in New Mexico recently, one of my good friends, and she wanted to know about veganism. I stayed with her for 5 nights, and we cooked, and afterwards she was very excited. And she went and bought some little vegan chicken patties. She said she bought her first plant-based creamer. She's wearing her vegan hat that she liked, that I had, and I got her one. So it was really the gentleness and watching and understanding that veganism isn't anything crazy. We made a chocolate tofu pie and she was super excited and said, "You're not taking any of this." So it's really about the not forcing anything down somebody's throat, but being kind and that nurturing, which is an element of feminine energy, that discovery and listening and seeing, who is open to this. And it's a whole nother way of relating. So I think it works when we listen, we're kind, and we are empathetic. Then people want to be around us. If we're arguing and saying, "Oh, I've got my list of, I've got my list of responses here that and one of these is going to work." I mean, sure, it's nice to be prepared, but also to have the conversation where you're listening and understanding that person and what's important to them.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that feminine energy is one way that people talk about it. In my work, we talk about the feminist care ethic. I wouldn't want to reinforce that it's women who have this, that gender or sex has given us more compassion or more care. Certainly in our culture, there are sexual stereotypes about who's caring and all, and that impacts. I mean, that's one reason there's a sexual politics of meat. Men aren't supposed to care. So a caring man throws off that stereotype. But I'd call it more, the feminist care ethic. And because I don't want to reinforce the idea that we're one way or another when it's much more open than that.
Well, it's the men are not allowed to. I mean, society says men have to shut down their feminine. I mean, because we all have masculine and feminine energy, but if men cry or men are compassionate, that's weak. And so it's about allowing all people to have all feelings, right? Because we're in this oppressive society that doesn't want to allow.
Well, and I think that that's sexual stereotyping. That, I think that our culture has an oppressive culture benefits from the gender binary. And that one reason we're seeing such a reaction by Republicans and the whole campaign against trans people that was part of the Republican campaign was because they rely on the gender binary, strong men and men who so many of the men around Trump right now, we know that they were sexually exploitive towards women. But the gender binary benefits oppressors. And I think as veganism, liberates itself and politicizes itself, it can recognize that anything that reinforces a gender binary is not going to help veganism because of the sexual politics of meat. The expectation that men eat meat and that the men who don't eat meat are wimpish, or there's so much homophobia that gets expressed in anti-vegan language. But I wanted to say one other thing about arguments, how we end up in arguments. And I think one of the reasons is, and I talk about that in Living Among Meat Eaters, that we're very literal people to begin with. In Sexual Politics of Meat, I talked about the absent reference, that animals are absent reference in meat eating, that we know there's a dead animal who's there. A living animal preceded the dead animal. The dead animal preceded the cut of of muscle or whatever that's being served. We're literal. We see that. And so we take conversations literally too. I take literally that you want to know what I'm saying. But in conversations with many meat eaters, they don't care. They've already gone on to their next argument. But because we're so literal, we don't catch that. And that's another reason to sort of be aware and stop a conversation, because we're being manipulated. Uh, and I did it wrong for 20 years. That's how I learned. And then I've tried to do it a different way since then, and that's what I write about.
Right. Yeah, I did it wrong too in the beginning. Like, I mean, I think most of us do. We just want to tell everybody and then say, "How can you not understand?" And then we attack them or whatever, and then and then we cry. But I don't know. Yeah, it's a learning process. I mean, veganism is a journey, and we can just do the best. Do the best and learn and be gentle with ourselves.
One of the great things, this unusual life that sexual politics of meat gave me, was how many people I heard from who became vegan because they read the book and, or just wanted me to know how the book changed their lives. And one young person wrote and knew I was working on Living Among Meat Eaters, like in 1999. And at that point, he had a website for new vegans. So he posted my questions that I was using to build the book. And the answers I got back, oh, they were just so wonderful. All these new vegans writing about their experiences. And it was based on that I did Living Among Meat Eaters. And I still hear from vegans who read it every year to remind them there is a different way of approaching conversations and relationships and learning, no, we don't have to be thrown off by the other person who wants to determine the content of the conversation. So, new vegans or young vegans going home and being told, you don't love me, you're not eating, the Thanksgiving meal, the Christmas meal, the Hanukkah meal, that you can answer in a way that's not defensive. I'm sorry you confused my veganism with loving you. If I hadn't been raised by parents who taught me to care, I would not have figured out that veganism is one way I care. Thank you. We don't have to get sucked in. We figured it out. We don't want to eat animal foods. We don't want to have animals exploited for us. We are then caught in the trap of other people not wanting to figure it out. And so what they're doing is trying to keep us from helping them to figure it out. So I talk about blocked vegetarians and blocked vegans, and our role is to figure out, well, what's blocking them? We're not blocked, so let's not get caught up in defending ourselves, but let's just step out of the way. And I think what often happens is that people tell us what's blocking them. They feel guilty. They're afraid to know this stuff. Well, then what we do is we show them there's life after all that. It's not like you have that being vegan is a negative experience. Thinking about veganism is a negative experience because people are afraid to change. They just don't know that not changing is harder. And one thing that, this goes back to my work writing Prayers for Animals. I did a book called Prayers for Animals. In fact, I saw Frank Hoffman when I read from it at a Summerfest. And it was a very moving experience to work with that book and share it. It's out of print, sadly, but one of the things I realized was that people are afraid to feel grief, that when you actually hear about what's happening to animals and how they're suffering, but also just the view of them as objects from the moment they're born, of course you're going to feel grief. And if you're responsible for that because you're eating them, the grief scares you. And we are not a culture that grieves well anyway. You get 3 days off if your loved one dies. We can see that in how people struggle with grieving about a dead companion animal. And I feel like one of the things I try to show is, yes, I feel grief. I feel grief every day for the world we're living in, what's happening and what's happening to animals. But it doesn't kill me. The grief is a gift that reminds me I care. And I think if there's some way for us to help non-vegans see that grief doesn't immobilize or disempower, but that grief is part of the gift of being alive, being connected in the world. So we're kind of like resituating how to grieve or helping to normalize grieving, but not letting it be overpowering, disempowering, or dismissed. Anyway, that's
Well, we have to feel, definitely. We have to feel. And if the beautiful thing about grief is if we didn't have the grief, we wouldn't be vegan. We wouldn't, if we shut off our feelings, that's what's causing us to make the right choices, the morally right choices, is these beautiful hearts that we have. And yeah, allowing us, we have to grieve because that's part of who we are.
right. But I think that the non-vegan thinks that that's all we are, that we're constantly thinking about that. And people people want to eat their food without consciousness. They want to just enjoy their meal. And when they argue or talk with us about veganism, what they find is that we're not enjoying our meal because we're so involved in the conversation. They don't want consciousness about eating. So that's another thing about a vegan propaganda meal. We're not talking about, unless we're talking about, oh yeah, that was preserved lemons, with the rice. We're not talking about why we did it. The overarching thing, we're just enjoying food again. And I think that helping people see that consciousness is not a burden, that consciousness is part of living, but it's not something that consumes us, whether it's the consciousness of guilt or grief or, ecocide. It's not paralyzing us, and it's not something that is at every dinner table. We can be joking and funny, and we can be all those things that non-vegans think we can't be. And it's just a matter of realizing that we have to kind of wrest the conversation back.
That's very true. Everything you're saying, and we've got some wonderful comments. Also, please put your questions in because we're coming up on the time for questions. Chili on Wheels says, extractive relationships isn't the way to go. As an animal rights movement, we need to focus on building reciprocal and non-extractive connection with others.
Yes,
that's
absolutely
beautiful. And then we have Tams Nicholson, our executive director, saying, thank you for joining us today for this fantastic conversation with Carol. She's also saying such wonderful guidance. And what a powerful way to reframe grief. Yes, it is a wonderful, different way to look at grief, Carol. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Tam. Thank you, Chili on Wheels.
And we also have another friend. We've got Wagsy here and from Rockford, Illinois. And then we have Thalia Puente here also. So thank y'all for joining us here. So how do we go about, well, tell us about your latest book, Carol.
Well, two latest books. First is The Sexual Politics of Meat, 35th anniversary edition. I cannot believe it. 35 years. It's now a feminist-vegan critical theory. It was always vegan theoretically. I just didn't know if I should call it that, since so many of the people I discuss in literature were vegetarian, not vegan, and then people said, yes, but it's still a vegan theory. So finally, the subtitle is the correct one. That's exciting. I wrote a new introduction and updated the book to references Frankenstein's monster was a vegan, etc. The other book, oh, I got, let me see if I can grab it. I think it's interesting. Here it is. But
I love all the books.
And, okay, I'm grabbing them all at the same time. Luckily, I know where they are. Luckily, I didn't drop them too far. One of the books that came out this year, a very different book, is Peddling Resistance. It is the subtitle Sympathy, Subversion, and Vegan Cycling. And it's essays by vegan cyclists. And what we're trying to say is that something happens when you're a vegan on a bicycling or tricycling. And we wanted to explore what that meant. So that came out this year. This is Living Among Meat Eaters, the new edition. I love that they put a Tyrannosaurus Rex on there. And whether that means that the Tyrannosaurus Rex is, it's kind of like non-vegans, it's all gonna just die away, and nobody will have to live among meat eaters because we'll all be vegans. That is a very hopeful thing. Anyway, that it's contentious living among meat eaters. So this is the new version. I've added a discussion of vegans of color because so much of mainstream media still focuses on white vegans and privilege, and help to sort of perpetuate this notion when vegans of color have increased at a much greater rate than white vegans, and vegans of color are reclaiming foods that kind of got trampled on from settler colonialism. And, that just a footnote that we should really understand how settler colonialism worked in the United States. It worked by stealing land from Native Americans. And the way that land then got used was for cattle. So cattle, the history of cattle in what we now know of as continental North America is so intricately involved in colonialism and oppression. Anyways, I don't go into all of that there. Some of that's in Berger, which I did not pull from that book. This is Never Too Late to Go Vegan. And I just love this book for people over 50. My nephews and nieces have all been turning 50 recently. So when they turn 50, I give them this book. I can't believe, that they're 50. But that has the chapter on caregiving and veganism. And then for those of you who want to think more about how veganism is part of a progressive movement, this is Protest Kitchen. It came out a few years ago, but the original idea was we were going to call it the anti-Trump diet. And this was in 2017, we wanted to show progressives how veganism is part of being concerned about the environment, concerned about patriarchal oppression, concerned about white supremacy, concerned about compassion. Well, here's the way veganism intersects with those concerns. But publishers in 2017 said, oh, he's not going to be around for long, And I've always joked and said, it's the first time one of my books was rejected by a publisher because of optimism. But in any case, for those of you who really want to be good allies and think about veganism within this larger political context in which we find ourselves, and perhaps want to help progressives who are non-vegan think about it, that might be the book to look at, Protest Kitchen.
Well, you have plenty of wonderful books and so much so much knowledge from your years of experience, and very, very grateful for that. And I see that we have a question here. Hi, Carol. Would you be a guest speaker at the New Roots Institute? They are a nonprofit organization providing year-long fellowships and grants to high school and college fellows to help end factory farming.
What a wonderful project. Certainly. I will put my email in the chat. That
Oh,
is the best way. Oh, I have to connect my YouTube account.
what's
So
your email, Carol?
CJA at caroljadams.com.
CJA at carol.adams.
No, Carol J. Adams. You got to be sure to put the J in. So I'll do it again. It's just my initials, CJA at caroljadams.com. But you can also write me from my website.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's the best way to go. All right. And then your website is?
caroljadams.com.
All right. Well, that's very easy. caroljadams.com.
And be sure to put the J in, because I think there was a realtor in California who had caroladams.com way back when and never got the domain. But anyway, what was interesting is that we added the J when Sexual Politics of Meat came out, because there were so many Carol Adamses, and now so many people just know me as Carol J. Adams. It's like it's all one name.
Right.
And do reach out to me, Thalia, and I'd love to be a part. Thank you, Chili on Wheels, too.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about Chili on Wheels, and it's.
You should interview Chili on Wheels.
All right, Chili on Wheels, you heard that. Please, yeah.
We were together at a conference at Farm Sanctuary.
Okay, well, I'd love to interview them. Yeah, reach out to me. I'm on social media everywhere. Send me a message, Chili, please. So, Carol, tell me what your most memorable experience of your vegan lifestyle is. If you have a billion, probably, but how about just one? If you have a good one.
This was interesting. My younger son was in Grand Rapids because they do an art contest there. He's a composer, and he was with an artist. They were doing a joint thing, and they became finalists for this award. And I thought, well, what am I doing down here in Dallas? I ought to go up for it. And he was staying with a friend. She had been a counselor at a camp that he had provided the music at. And so I used some frequent flyer miles and flew up, and she put us both up in her house. She had an extra room, and Ben moved to the couch. So the day we were flying out, another friend of ours, Matt Halteman, who you should also interview, who's just come out with a new book called Hungry, Beautiful Animals about veganism. Matt was friends with people who were doing a pop-up vegan bake sale that day, and he arranged that I could come in early because I had to catch a flight. So Ben's friend took me to the pop-up sale, and what a wonderful experience it was. Oh my gosh, all these vegan sweets and vegan foods and vegan pudding, and the people who knew I was coming and knew who I was and all, they wanted to give me some of their vegan treats, and I wanted to pay for them. So anyway, I came away with these incredible vegan spinach cheddar scones and vegan donuts and vegan pudding. And the vegan spinach cheddar scones are on my website. So again, it's caroljadams.com. Go to veganism. And in the car going back to the apartment before we went to the airport, Ben's friend said, "Does this happen wherever you go, that people give you, delicious vegan food?" And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, well, yes, it's kind of amazing. And she said, well, then I have to figure out what I want to write about to bring that into my life. And I think for the 15 years that I was writing Sexual Politics of Meat, all I knew was how to be a writer. I wanted to be to write a book that was compelling and did the work I wanted it to do. It was a lot of work to write the book. And when it came out, suddenly I was an author, and nothing had prepared me for being an author, what that experience was. And I've had quite a dramatic experience, people sending me examples of the sexual politics of meat and all, but here I certainly never expected that over 35 years I would experience so many wonderful vegan meals. And one time I was in Victoria, British Columbia. I had just spoken in Vancouver, and there was a person who did vegan cheesecakes as a business, and he happened to be going to Victoria the next day. And he left off at the hotel I was staying an entire vegan cheesecake just to thank me. And when we got there, my spouse and I, it was just amazing. It was beautiful vegan cheesecake. And yes, I ate it for breakfast every day that I was there. So I'd say, these sort of unexpected gifts of vegan meals and food that just sort of happen. I loved that. But I also feel like every single person who writes me or tells me that the book changed their lives or what it meant to them, they're giving me a gift, because I only know the book from the inside out, from that struggle to figure out what I'm trying to say. But everybody else knows it from the outside in. And so everybody's experience as a book, as they share it with me, they give me something new. So I feel like I'm in this relationship with my readers who reach out to me. And it's such a gift. So I feel so honored. I feel like I often want to go back to that carol in the 1980s and say, don't worry, don't despair. Yes, you feel lonely. Yes, you're trying to figure out what you're doing. Yes, you're confused. It's all going to work out. But somehow I guess, I believed in the book enough never to give up on it. And now I know how to make vegan cheesecake.
Well, I'm glad you didn't give up on it because you've changed a lot of lives. That's wonderful. So we have another question here, and that I've got your caroljadams.com. All right. I'm going to put this, see if that. All right, Carol, I love hearing you speak. Is a podcast something you would start in the future?
Probably not, but thank you. Thank you very much. I would have to be more organized than I am to do something like that. But I'd be happy to join other people's podcasts.
Well, that's good to know. Yes. And were you a writer as a little girl? Did you love books?
Yes, I grew up in a 19th century house in Western New York, and it had a library. And we had our own books. We had bookshelves in our rooms. I read Nancy Drew's The Wizard of Oz. There were many books in the Wizard of Oz series. And the first thing I was going to write, I think I was in 4th grade, I was going to write a book. It's so interesting now. It was going to be a book of recipes based on the Girl Scout recipes we were making at camp. And each page was going to have a different animal introduce the recipe. So like a hippo introduced how to make, campfire angel food cake. And anyway, that was my first idea. I think as a writer, I'm very lucky that I had such a compelling argument I want to make, because it's very hard to be a writer. You really have to have faith in yourself, and your first draft is lousy, but that's what a first draft is. So you have to kind of learn how to live through the process of writing. And I got to the other side of the first book, and I learned all that because I cared so much about the issue and the point I was trying to make. So because of that, I stuck it out and learned how to write. So many people say, oh, I've got a book, I'll write it sometime. And no, if you have a book, start writing down the ideas. Every idea is a gift. Write it down when you've got it.
Well, that's very good advice. We have something from Chili on Wheels. Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys were great books. I love those books. I love reading. I
Yeah.
still do.
Yeah, me too.
Imagine that, Carol. I'm jealous of your background. Goodness sakes. Well, Tams is saying that she says she grew up in New York too, near Ithaca. It's a small world.
Yes, I was just outside of Buffalo, 40 miles to the west of Buffalo, where they're getting all the snow now. That's what my childhood was like.
Oh, yeah. I talked to my friend Angela this morning and she was getting a bunch of snow. I was jealous of that too. But yeah, we're warm here. I'm in Atlanta area. Y'all, I just want to remind y'all to go to www.all-creatures.org to check out the hundreds and thousands of pages of free resources updated daily, 7 days a week without break. And sign up for our weekly newsletter, and be sure to search vegan churches on our site to find vegan faith-based resources near you. And if you don't know of one, please reach out to our executive director, Tams, at all-creatures.org. So I see that we have a few more minutes left, Carol, and I want to make sure that everybody knows about your books again. So where can they buy your books, Carol?
Well, right now, Bloomsbury has the new Sexual Politics of Meat. It's not out for another week. And they've got that on sale. I think it's $25. On my website, I link you. I do not link you to Amazon. I link you to a variety of places. I mean, one of the best things you could do if you really want to help support writers like me is ask your local independent bookstore to stock the books and order the books you want. But you can also order online. I know we're all spoiled by Amazon, but you can order from other places, or there is a competitor to Amazon now, and you identify a local bookstore you want to get some of the profits. So you could also go there. And why I'm blanking on that website, I don't know. It is bookshop.org. Bookshop.org.
Okay.
Bookshop.org.
Okay, great. Because everyone needs to be reading your books. Go ahead.
On my website, I do identify, all the others. I'll just put in, since we're talking to other vegans, Patty Brightman and Ginny Messina and I, who did Never Too Late to Go Vegan. We also did a book called Even Vegans Die. And we wanted to do it because we kept hearing about, a vegan who died of breast cancer, and, people were saying to her, oh, well, you became a vegan too late. Or, I know we believe in the power of veganism, but we also need to recognize that veganism is not going to keep us alive necessarily. And so we did this book that's from Lantern Books, Even Vegans Die. And also where we recommend that everybody who's an adult has a will. And we talk about being receptive to vegans who have an illness or other issues, that to make sure that they feel welcome at our potlucks and all. We heard stories from people, a vegan who had acne or a vegan who had a colostomy bag, and how they didn't really feel welcome because they felt that they were giving veganism a bad name. And, let's not pretend that every vegan looks like a 25-year-old athlete. Let's have multiple ways of being vegan in our culture.
Yes, that's beautiful. And that has actually came up just in the past few days. So I'm very grateful for your book. And I saw that in the Living Among meat eaters, I think, or one of the places about where you are, Carol, because you're everywhere. So I love watching your videos on YouTube and your interviews. So y'all, if you haven't seen those, just Google that and see more of these great interviews. But wow, is there any last final things you wanted to say, Carol? Because I'm just very smitten by all your work, everything you're doing.
I wish you all wonderful vegan meals and wonderful relationships and ways of bringing your vision to a world that often chooses oppression rather than liberation. And don't feel alone. And see veganism, like me during the years I was a caregiver. No matter what there is to despair, we have this beautiful meal at the end of each day. And blessings on you all.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Carol. And thank you all, everyone, for watching. Thalia, and we've got Wagsley, Chilies on Wheels, and Tams, and everyone else watching behind the scenes and on the replay. This has been such an honor, Carol, and we'll have to come back you'll have to come back in the future, right, on the next editions.
Thanks for all the work you do to make this happen. And good luck with all your next interviews, and for all of you who were a part of this. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Blessings for everyone. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.